these are deterministic systems. They can be expressed in terms of equations and algorithms. And then in contrast, there's the judgment school, the judgment category of forecasting, based on prediction, based on the wisdom of crowds, based on genius forecasting, science fiction, invention, inspiration, imagination resides there. So we have the people who build models, create equations, and the people who say, we have expert opinion, and these are the two threads that are going forward simultaneously, the two categories. Since the US election is so fresh in my mind and those of others, and since there was such a large effort in forecasting the outcome of the election, and those forecasts were so wrong, you're entitled to ask what went wrong with this whole field of foresight. Why is it that on the night before the election, I reviewed the polls from 19 different forecasters? These were public opinion polls about who would be the next president. And of the 19, 17 were wrong. Not by a little, but by a lot. There were one or two that were correct, and they predicted Mr. Trump would occupy the White House. One of those was a poll, and one of those was an equation, which gave the answer that the Republicans would win. Why? Now starts all the looking at why the polls were wrong. Well, because there was general belief that someone who is as different as Mr. Trump would not be a viable candidate. He didn't measure up to the historical norms. There was a misunderstanding in our country about the depth of the anger and enthusiasm of some voters. And there were unexpected external events, such as our Federal Bureau of Investigation making pronouncements about candidate Clinton just before the election. These are examples of how current events, how current inventions, current differences from the past can affect our view of the future and decision making. Now, as I introduce our speakers, let me close by stating some limitations for this field and some hopes. A limitation of importance. You could argue reasonably that the bigger computers will give us better forecasting, better decision making, but that may not be true. Bigger machines will not necessarily bring more accuracy. Even if we could replicate the position of every molecule in a system, human or otherwise, and the velocity and the vector directions of these molecules, the system would still elude us in terms of our ability to understand its future state. That's because complex systems at this point cannot be forecasted with any accuracy. Using models to test policies in advance may be a flawed approach. It's certainly the approach that we use in government agencies to try and understand whether or not policies will work. We build a model, we say this is where it's going without our policy, then we run the model again with our policy and attribute the difference between those two runs to the implementation of the policy. But in an era where complexity exists and we are very dependent on the initial conditions, the changes between those two runs may be quite an artifact of the model, not of the policy. Big data is a reality and may give us a new kind of social science. This is a hope. Most science is based on causality. Force equals mass times acceleration. Push on it this way, on that much mass, we know what the acceleration will be. That's a forecast. We have no such analog in the social sciences, but this notion of causality may give way to data in big data applications. It's already being used, for example, to improve medical diagnosis. And we may have advanced artificial intelligence that will add to these fields. The artificial intelligence is of course coming along. We have a computer named Watson, which has done better than human beings in games, but it's already being applied in a number of human enterprises to review past trends, to draw from scientific literature potential reasons for those trends and their future direction. What we don't have yet, and I hope comes from meetings such as this, is not artificial intelligence, not collective intelligence, but wisdom, artificial wisdom, the synthesis of what we have out there, the synthesis of data that's available to us to create wisdom. And we look at this field facing some really tough problems. There's this new populism that gave rise to our new president-elect is boiling underneath the surface. We see people who are dissatisfied with their position and now have the ability to express it in ways that didn't exist before. The future of work, future of employment, the use of leisure time in productive ways may give rise to a new kind of Ludditism, anti-progress. There's an increasing difference, an increasing distance between right and left politics. There are few ideas about what we need and can get from science, even science of the historical variety. There's a possibility of large-scale terrorism. We have done some studies on the future of terrorism and the possibility of there being a single individual, lone wolf, massively destructive person making use of some of the new technologies, particularly from biology, exists as a threat. I think a realistic threat and an important area that must be addressed. We don't understand what is true. One of the reasons for the new populism is the spreading of ideas, true or false, through social media, the ability to copy it and spread it without any kind of understanding of its basic value or truth, and a long lingering problem in nuclear proliferation must be addressed in the future. Our speakers are Phil Tetlock. He's a futurist. I will introduce him now. A psychologist concerned with measuring good political judgment and identifying who is a good forecaster. From the University of Pennsylvania, where he conducts his research, he is also a best-selling author. New book is Super Forecasting. I give you Phil Tetlock.
Okay, so I'm Phil Tetlock, and thank you very much for inviting me. I've been doing forecasting tournaments for a long time. I've been for approximately 32 years. Back to the days when Mikhail Gorbachev was still a relatively anonymous member of the Soviet Politburo, and liberals and conservatives in the United States were arguing over whether Ronald Reagan was increasing or decreasing the likelihood of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. The work I've been doing has been sponsored by the US government, and we have collected millions of forecasts from thousands of forecasters, and we track the accuracy of those individuals over time, and we've been doing this now for roughly 32 years. And there are two major themes that have come out from that work. One is that experts are not very good at predicting, and the other is that experts are very good at explaining. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, in 1984, neither liberals nor conservatives were able to predict, or even close to predicting, the momentous changes that were about to occur in the Soviet Union in 1985 through 1990. Not even close. Nonetheless, within 18 months of Gorbachev's ascension to power, both liberals and conservatives felt they could explain what happened. The liberals argued that Gorbachev's ascension to power was not due in any way, shape, or form to the policies of President Reagan, but were due to the weakness of the Soviet economy. And the conservatives argued that credit was due to President Reagan and taking a hardline stance toward the Soviet Union in Afghanistan and elsewhere. Now, this is a pattern that we have seen over and over again when we study expert judgment. Very limited ability to predict, coupled with great confidence and ability to explain after the fact, and a tendency to see relatively little reason to change one's mind in response to the facts. Forecasting tournaments, with the major tool that I use for improving foresight, have the power to make us more honest with ourselves about what we do and do not know. And honesty with ourselves, honesty in confronting our ignorance, is a key condition. It's a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition for becoming a better forecaster. Now, the benefits of participating in forecasting tournaments have been most clearly shown in a series of forecasting tournaments that were run between 2011 and 2015 under the sponsorship of a US government agency known as Intelligence Advanced Research Projects Agency. And what I want to emphasize to you is that if you want to get the benefits of forecasting tournaments in your country, in your organizations, there are three basic things you need to do. And I'm going to spell out what those three basic things are. The first step is forecasting tournaments can only be as interesting as the questions that are in them. So the first step requires creativity. It requires imagination. For example, in the slide before you here, in the blue circle, we have a theme that the World Economic Forum, Davos, used last year as one of its organizing themes. The notion that the world is headed into, the world is already, perhaps already in the early phases of, a fourth industrial revolution that will cause massive dislocations in labor markets by 2030 or 2040, and that will be driven by very strong forms of artificial intelligence. This is called a scenario. It's a big idea. It may be right, it may be wrong, but what are the things we would expect to observe in the relatively near to medium-term future if we are indeed on the historical path toward a fourth industrial revolution? Well, one thing we might expect to observe would be in the spring of 2016 to see the Google program, AlphaGo, defeat the world champion in Go in Korea. That's one very specific indicator, sub-indicator of this larger phenomenon. That indeed did happen. What other things might we expect to observe? Well, we might expect to observe driverless Uber cars picking people up in Las Vegas or Singapore. We might expect to observe major surge in robotic spending. We might expect to observe Watson MD. Watson is the program IBM developed that won the World Jeopardy Championship. We might expect to observe that form of artificial intelligence doing a better job of diagnosing patients than the world's leading medical specialists. So there are a lot of possible things. Half of the accounting jobs in the United States might disappear by 2022, say. These are all sub-indicators. So what we do in forecasting tournaments is we try to populate them with questions that people care about, but are rigorous enough to be resolvable in a relatively short time frame, which means that we can score the accuracy of the people who are participating in the tournament. So we want to combine creativity and imagination on the one hand with rigor and resolvability on the other hand. So that's step one. Step one is populating your forecasting tournament with interesting questions, and we can talk more about various ways of doing that. Step two is a very hard step for many people and many organizations to take. You need to set up systems for scoring accuracy. I gave a talk to the International Monetary Fund about 3 years ago, And you can see here an example of some forecasting that they were doing in 2014. They say that we see a risk that the recovery in the Eurozone could stall, demand might weaken, and low inflation may turn into deflation. We counted 120 uses of the word could, 16 uses of the word might, 5 of possibly. It's virtually impossible for anyone to figure out whether this forecast was right or wrong, because it straddles both sides of maybe. If there had been an economic collapse, they could have pointed to this. If the economy had taken off, they could have pointed to this. If you're going to make forecasts using this format, this kind of vague verbiage, it will be impossible to learn to get better at forecasting. I'll give you an example of just how vague this kind of vague forecasting can be. We've done studies in which we ask people to translate the words in the IMF report onto a probability scale. So it might happen could mean anything from a probability of 0.09 to 0.64. It could happen could mean anything from 0.02 to 0.56. Possible could mean 0.001 to 0.45. After all, it's possible we could be hit by an asteroid in the next half hour. It's a real possibility, could straddles from 0.22 to 0.89, and so forth. So the key point here is that it makes a lot of sense if you're a middle-level manager in an organization, or if you're an intelligence analyst inside the US government, to do the safe thing and make simply vague verbiage forecasts. If I tell you I think there's a distinct possibility that Vladimir Putin, his next move will be against Latvia in the next year, I'm pretty much covered either way. If Putin does move against Latvia, I can say, hey, I told you there was a distinct possibility. And if Putin does not move against Latvia, I can say, hey, I just said it was possible. So I'm safe. The rational thing for me to do is to stick with vague verbiage. Unfortunately, this is also what makes it impossible to learn to get better at forecasting. Vague verbiage forecasting is a huge obstacle, and people will only engage in the effort of translating their hunches into numbers if they feel they're not going to get fired for doing so. So we set up a system with the US government for scoring the accuracy of probability judgments. It's also been used by some investment banks and other entities. Imagine that you have 3 days of forecasting and you're a financial analyst working for a big bank on Wall Street. And you're asked to predict what's the likelihood that a company is going to report a positive earnings surprise, which of course is associated with usually an increase in the stock price. On the first day, you predict there's a 90% likelihood of a surprise, and there is a surprise. This is a method of scoring the accuracy of that judgment. Now, if someone says 90% and it happens, you say, well, that's pretty good. And indeed, the scoring system reflects it. You get a very good score of 0.02. The next day, you say 90% and it doesn't happen. You say, well, that's not very good. You get a very bad Breyer score of 1.62. The third day, you simply say, look, I think it's 50-50. And when you say 50-50, that averages out to the accuracy of the dart-throwing chimpanzee, essentially. And you get a Breyer score of 0.5. Over time, if you get enough people to make enough judgments on enough subjects, you can identify who the better forecasters are. And that's exactly what we do in our work. Setting up a system for rigorously keeping score. So the first step is imaginative question generation. The second step is setting up a rigorous system for keeping score. And a rigorous system for keeping score is going to reward people for being justifiably decisive. You'll get a good score for assigning high probabilities to things that happen, low probabilities to things that don't happen, and you'll get nailed, and you'll get nailed really hard if you assign high probabilities to things that don't happen. Now, the third step, and critical step for becoming, using the work I've done with the US government, is learning how to run experiments. Because now you have questions you care about, and you have a method of keeping score. You can actually assess what works, and that's what we did. You can assess whether it's possible to improve probabilistic foresight. And one thing we discover is what we call the good judgment continuum. You can find who the best forecasters are. They have scores that are down towards 0, or what we call omniscience, which would be perfection. The typical forecaster, you have the dart-throwing chimpanzee, and then you have, over here, you have someone who's always wrong. So you can identify where people in your organization fall along this performance continuum. You can also you can run experiments inside your organization to identify the factors that improve accuracy. And there are 4 factors that allowed the Good Judgment Project to win the forecasting tournaments that were sponsored by the US government, and which led to the book on super forecasting. The most important factor turns out to be identifying talent, identifying the so-called super forecasters. The next factor turns out to be putting people together in teams that work effectively together, and Delphi is an important part of that, and Ted knows a lot about that. The third factor is training, and the fourth factor is aggregating judgments in the right way. Now, identifying the right forecasters is a subject that I go into in great detail in the book. Fluid intelligence matters, numeracy matters, but the most important thing for becoming a good forecaster does not turn out to be your IQ. It turns out to be whether you believe that forecasting is a skill that can be cultivated and is worth cultivating. It's only if you're willing to give it a shot. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If you don't believe it's possible, you're never going to try, you're never going to get better at it. The next thing is training. And here we train people to avoid different kinds of errors that are possible in forecasting, like underconfidence versus overconfidence. And we have training exercises for doing that. The third factor is teaming, and teaching people how to disagree without being disagreeable. A big problem in teams is, of course, excessive agreement. But there are ways of encouraging people and facilitating the expression of disagreement in ways that don't cause excessive conflict. The fourth factor, and this looks a little bit complicated, but it's not, is the value of viewpoint diversity. Imagine that you're a military commander and you have 4 people who are giving you advice on whether there's a terrorist mastermind in a certain location. And one of them, and let's say for sake of argument that they all give you the same probability judgment of 0.7. What should you conclude? Well, the commander will obviously conclude that the answer is 0.7. But that's not necessarily the right thing to do. If the advisors are all clones of each other who are drawing on the same information, then 0.7 is the right answer. But if your advisors have different sources of information that they're processing in different ways, if one of them has access to cyber intelligence, another has access to satellite reconnaissance, a third has access to human intelligence, then you can become more extreme. Okay. So the key points there, the 4 components of how to do better: get the right people, train them the right way, team them the right way, and aggregate their judgments in the right way. Get in the practice of generating pivotal questions you care about, the imaginative process. Start running forecasting tournaments and discover your own super forecasters. And finally, don't take anything for granted. Continually test the techniques that you're using for improving judgment. Thank you.
Mike Singh. He's the Chief Executive Officer at Telecom Carib, Senior Consultant, Fields Telecommunications, Media, and Technology. And I know his search is for more bandwidth. Please, Mike.
Your Excellencies, my brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi barakatuhu. I bring you peace, blessings, and tidings of the people of Latin America, the long-lost cousins of the Arab world. And I begin by saying, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It is indeed a great honor and a pleasure to be here in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, which you just celebrated 45 years of political independence and fulfillment of the great ideals of the late Baba Zayed and the late Sheikh Maktoum, founder of Dubai. You've come a far way. There was an opening segment of this conference that dealt with the issue of Cordoba. I must remind the world, in its heyday, Cordoba, the great libraries of Cordoba in Spain, in the Iberian Peninsula, had more books than all of European Christendom. But then the Muslim world fell behind. But today, the rise of Dubai signals, in my opinion, a new Cordoba. You've achieved in a substantially short time what not even the enlightened democracies and industrialized world, they took 100 years, but here you've done it in less than 50, which is remarkable. And I attest that to the great and exemplary and selfless leadership of the late Sheikh Mohammed, of the late Zayed Al Nahyan, of the father of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, and all the other great leaders of this part of the Arab world for having a vision of coming together. Today, like this, you're nothing, but with a clenched fist, you can achieve a lot, and here you are achieving this. Singapore, in 1965, upon its political culmination and independence and establishment under Lee Kuan Yew, had not even a quarter of what you had. They have no natural resources, but their most important resource was their human capital. And in the space of 30 years, Singapore went from being a malaria-infested backwater of Southeast Asia to becoming one of the most envied economies in the world because of the emphasis placed on facts. If we do not deal with the reality that confronts us, then we are in great denial. The Economic Development Board of Singapore was established specifically to benchmark where they were and where they needed to be. So a lot of emphasis went into harnessing raw data, understanding the needs not only of their population, but understanding what will drive investor confidence. You can build the best infrastructure, you can build the best buildings, but if you do not have competent human capital, then this is all a moot point. So the most important arbiter in driving growth, in driving innovation, is human capital. And that can only be achieved when you have an equal playing field in terms of access to education. I grew up in a home without a telephone or a television, but I ended up going to work for AT&T. And this is because my grandparents believed strongly, and my parents, in the importance of education. The Arab world needs to level the playing field, making education available to everyone, and in so doing also bandwidth. And I have a short clip to show you before I move on to the second aspect of my presentation.
Steve Jobs said, "Everyone here has the sense that right now is one of those moments when we are influencing the future."
The world as we know it is changing to a world with a rapidly increasing population, digitally wired, interconnected through telecommunications and the internet, where local is now instantly also global. All sectors of society and business demand instant, fast, and secure connectivity.
The world is in the midst of massive economic challenges and change, where the old traditional order of the North and West is no longer dominant.
BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa are an emerging economy that is increasingly being recognized as a major contributor to global financial stability and growth.
South Africa is positioned as the gateway to Africa and is connected to 21 African countries through WACS, the West African Cable System, as well as SEACOM and EASY, East African Submarine Cable Systems on the east.
Brazil has a similar footprint in South America, connecting all major South and Central American countries.
Telecommunications, entertainment, financial data, health, education, security, governments, all demand fast, secure, and instant connectivity to enable economies to compete on the global stage.
As the demand curve swings towards the east, the current digital infrastructure will in future not be able to support the vast data.
China is most likely to become the leading destination for internet traffic by 2030. BRICS Cable aims to service this demand by supplying a 12.8 terabit turnkey, state-of-the-art fiber optic cable from Vladivostok in eastern Russia through China, India, and South Africa to Brazil and finally to the USA. A massive opportunity exists where the vast bulk of the world's population could link themselves via the BRICS cable. This will lessen the dependence of the world on the north and offer a more cost-effective south-south telecommunications opportunity. State-of-the-art fiber optic cable linking the world's fastest-growing economies can be an economic reality by the end of 2014. This is a high-quality 100 gigabits per wavelength, 34,000-kilometer submarine fiber optic cable system linking the fastest-growing economies in the world with each other and with the USA.
Today, we all know the pendulum has swung from the west to the east and from the north to the south. The growth factors are going to be India, China, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America. Dubai occupies a pivotal geostrategic position, and it's very important for Dubai to bring this cable here so then it can take the next wave of innovation. We are hearing every day about the Internet of Things, virtual reality. We are hearing about machine learning. We're hearing about driverless cars. All of these things are happening, but they cannot happen and give you the value that you need without sustainable and adequate bandwidth flows. And I wish to propose to the Mohammed bin Rashid Foundation, to the government of the UAE, that Dubai must fulfill its manifest destiny of becoming the innovation hub that will connect the East and the West. You already have two of the world's best air links with Etihad in Abu Dhabi and Emirates here in Dubai. So there is no reason why Dubai should not take this a step further in becoming the hub for all of internet clearance, for all the traffic that's going to go east to west. The next big challenge I will tell you you will face in this part of the world is cybersecurity. Cyber war is real. And you know, right around you, you've got friends and you've got enemies. And this is going to become the next big challenge in the future. I wish to express my sincere thanks to His Excellency Sheikh Jamal and Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Foundation for inviting me here and sharing with you briefly, and to thank each and every one of you for the splendid effort and diligent work I saw for myself last night that went into making this event what it is. Shukran, and may Allah bless the people of the United Arab Emirates, and look forward to many years of partnership between Latin America and the Middle East. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Mike. Our third speaker is Suleiman Al-Kabi. He focuses on futures research to improve decision-making by government agencies. He works to introduce and apply foresight methods and thinking in the UAE. He's Deputy Director of the Decision Support Center at the Ministry of the Interior. Suleiman.
Thank you. No, I have one.
They're not going to hear you. You got that?
Yeah, I got that. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. من منا ما فكر في المستقبل؟ من منا ما سأل نفسه كيف بتكون مدارسنا في المستقبل؟ هل بتكون في مدارس أصلاً في المستقبل؟ كيف شكل الفصول الدراسية في دولة الإمارات بعد 20 سنة من الآن؟ ما هي الوظائف اللي بتختفي من دولة الإمارات العربية المتحدة خلال 20 سنة القادمة؟ ونفس الوقت شو هي الوظائف اللي بتطلع خلال هالفترة؟ مثل ما قال اليوم في المحاضرة الأولى دكتور توماس، قال إن أكثر عن 2 مليار وظيفة حتى 2030 بتختفي، وبتطلع بدالهن 2 مليار وظيفة ثانيين. شو هي الوظائف اللي بتختفي من الإمارات وشو اللي بتطلع؟ وكيف لازم نستعد لها من الآن؟ كيف نطرش الناس اللي بتدرس من الآن، نستعد لهاي الوظائف ونطرشهم من الآن يدرسون في هاي الوظائف اللي بتطلع في المستقبل؟ شو هي الجرائم المستقبلية بعد 20 سنة في دولة الإمارات؟ شو هي الجرائم المستقبلية اللي بتواجه شرطة دولة الإمارات؟ لازم نستعد لها من الآن. كل هاي التساؤلات بيجيب عليها استشراف في المستقبل. اليوم في محاضرتي بتكلم عن استشراف المستقبل بشكل بيسك، علم أكاديمي وليس فلسفي. استشراف المستقبل بالمصطلح العلمي البسيط هو القدرة على معرفة ما قد يحدث في المستقبل. شو هي التحديات اللي بتصادفني في المستقبل وأعمل لها خطة استراتيجية من الآن عشان أني أمنع وقوعها؟ وشو هي التحديات المستقبلية اللي بتصادفني؟ فهناك فرص، هناك تحديات مستقبلية، هناك فرص أنا لازم أقتنصها من الآن، هناك تحديات مستقبلية لازم أعمل لها خطة استراتيجية من الآن عشان أمنع وقوعها. استشراف المستقبل تخيل عبارة عن كرة كبيرة أو دائرة، وارمي فيها كل المصطلحات الاستراتيجية اللي أنت تعرفها: رؤية، رسالة، خطط استراتيجية، أهداف، مبادرات، مشاريع، تنبؤ، سيناريوهات، كل هاي تحت منظومة استشراف المستقبل. إذن استشراف المستقبل هي المظلة اللي تظل كل المصطلحات الاستراتيجية. يثور تساؤل آخر: شو الفرق بين التخطيط الاستراتيجي واستشراف المستقبل؟ هل هم مكملين لبعض؟ هل كل مصطلح يختلف عن الثاني؟ أم هم مصطلحين نفس المفهوم، نفس الفكرة؟ استشراف المستقبل هو عبارة عن مدخل من مدخلات التخطيط الاستراتيجي، وفي نفس الوقت التخطيط الاستراتيجي هو مخرج من مخرجات الخطة الاستشرافية. معناته أن أنا أول شيء أبدأ بالخطة الاستشرافية، أو من بعدها تتمخض لي خطة استراتيجية وابتكار. فأول شيء هي استشراف المستقبل، بعدين يأتي الخطط الاستراتيجية. استشراف المستقبل طويل المدى، الخطة الاستشرافية طويلة المدى، 10 سنوات، 15 سنة، 20 سنة، طبعا على حسب العلماء كل واحد عنده رأي معين. تخطيط استراتيجي مثل ما أنتم عارفين 3-5 سنوات، وبعد منهم قال إلى 10 سنوات. استشراف المستقبل فيه تخيل، فيه ابتكار، فيه إبداع أكثر عن التخطيط الاستراتيجي، لأنه يبدأ يتكلم عن الغموض، لأن الاستشراف المستقبل فيه غموض أكثر عن التخطيط الاستراتيجي. أيضاً شيء مهم في استشراف المستقبل أنه يركز على التوجهات المستقبلية اللي حاصلة حول العالم بشكل عام. أما التخطيط الاستراتيجي يركز على البيئة الداخلية في الخطة الاستراتيجية. فاستشراف المستقبل يشوف شو الويك سيجنالز اللي صاير في العالم، شو الترند، شو الميجا ترند، شو الوايلد كارد، شو الدرايفرز الموجود حول العالم اللي بيأثر على السؤال أو الدراسة الاستشرافية اللي أنا بأدرسها. دائما أعطي مثال السفينة في الفرق عشان أشرح الفرق بين استشراف المستقبل والتخطيط الاستراتيجي. تخيلوا أنتم حاليا في سفينة، السفينة هي مؤسستكم، هي وزارتكم، هي البيئة اللي أنتم عايشين فيها اللي تستشرفون من خلالها، وأنت قائد هاي السفينة. فبتسأل أحد الربان اللي هو أخف وزن يصعد فوق، هاي السارية عشان يشوف أمام السفينة، لأن مستوى البعد ماله غير عن مستوى الربان، فيقدر يشوف أوسع عن الأسفل. فربان السفينة اللي هو أنت تسأله يا مستشرف، يقول لي شو اللي صاير في المستقبل، شو اللي بيصادف السفينة، امسح لي الأفق. فيقول والله أنا حسب الأدوات اللي عندي وحسب خبرتي أنا كمستشرف قاعد أشوف في متغيرات كثيرة بتواجه السفينة اللي هي مؤسستك مثلا. والله أنا قاعد أشوف في المدى البعيد أشوف منطقة رمادية ضخمة وبجانبها منطقة تقريبا خضراء، لكن مش متأكد، لكن أنا أتوقع أنها تكون جزيرة. احنا قلنا استشراف المستقبل، قلنا في فرصة في تحدي. فهو يشوف أن الجزيرة فرصة أمامه، لكن مش متأكد 100%، لأن استشراف المستقبل ما يعطيك بيانات 100%، لأنه كله يبحث عن الغموض لكن بنسب معينة. فيقول أنا أشوف فرصة أمامي، وأيضا أشوف سفينة ضخمة متجهة لسفينتنا، وأتوقع أنها ممكن تكون وعليها أعلام سود مثلا، وأتوقع أنها قراصنة. فمعناته أنا عندي تحدي سفينة القراصنة وعندي فرصة للجزيرة. هي القائد يقول له أوكي يا مستشرف، أنت الحين خبرتنا هذه اللي بتصادفنا، هذه التحديات الموجودة في المستقبل، يلا يا مستشرف خبرنا شو نسوي، أنا كقائد شو أسوي، انصحني. يقول لي لا، يقول لا أنا كمستشرف ما أقول لك شو تسوي، أنا أمسح الأفق وأقول لك شو الفرص الموجودة، شو التحديات اللي بتصادفني، لكن أنت كخبرتك كقائد عندك خبرة، عندك حكمة، عندك فريق التخطيط الاستراتيجي. كلف فرق التخطيط الاستراتيجي أن يسوي خطط استراتيجية يقتنص الفرص ويبتعد عن التحدي. فأي القائد يكلف فريق تخطيط استراتيجي يقول له والله احنا عندنا تحدي، يلا سوي خطة استراتيجية، دخل المدافع مثلا، دخل الأغراض في داخل السفينة، إذا تحقق ووقع هذا التحدي احنا جاهزين، إذا لم يقع معناته احنا تعلمنا، ففي فرص للتعلم. فهذا هو الشيء الرئيسي لاستشراف المستقبل، أن احنا نتعلم ونكون جاهزين لأي حدث قد يطرأ في المستقبل. شو هي خطوات استشراف المستقبل؟ طبعاً في مدارس كثيرة في استشراف المستقبل تتكلم عن خطوات استشراف المستقبل، كل له مدرسته، لكن أنا بتكلم عن منهجية جامعة هيوستن الأمريكية. عنده منهجية لاستشراف المستقبل عبارة عن 6 خطوات، من بداية تأطير العمل وعمل الأهداف للدراسة إلى تنفيذ ووضع خطط استراتيجية. هو يقول استشراف المستقبل عبارة عن 6 خطوات. أول 3 خطوات تعتبر هي استشراف المستقبل، هي وضع الخطة الاستراتيجية، وضع السيناريوهات المستقبلية، أوكي، وضع الخطط الاستشرافية. والخطوة الرابعة والخامسة والسابعة والسادسة هي عبارة عن مرحلة التخطيط الاستراتيجي. وهذا احنا في دولة الإمارات أو في العالم العربي يوم نسوي خططنا الاستراتيجية نبدأ من المرحلة الرابعة والخامسة والسادسة، نسوي الرسالة والرؤية والمبادرات وبعدين ننفذها. خططنا الاستراتيجية ليست مبنية على خطة استشرافية. أنا ما نقول خططنا الاستراتيجية خطأ، لكن كل ما كانت الخطط الاستراتيجية مبنية على خطة استشرافية كل ما زادت فرصة نجاح هاي الخطة الاستراتيجية وتحققت أهدافها. أدوات استشراف المستقبل على حسب ميلينيوم بروجكت، مشروع ميلينيوم، قال أن هناك أكثر عن 36 أداة من أدوات استشراف المستقبل. وزعتها طبعا على 6 نقاط، على 6 مراحل. أنت كمؤسسة تقدر تطبق أي أداة أنت تشوفها مناسبة لمؤسستك. أنا كخبرتي اشتغلت مع أكثر عن مؤسسة حكومية في الإمارات. معظم المؤسسات الحكومية في دولة الإمارات تؤيد أو تحبذ استخدام السيناريوهات المستقبلية، استخدام فيوتشر ويل اللي هو دولاب المستقبل، استخدام أداة الهورايزن سكانينج واستخدام الدلفاي. ما بجري عشان ما في وقت، ما بتكلم عن كل الأدوات، لكن بقول أداة تخطيط السيناريوهات المستقبلية. احنا قلنا هناك 36 أداة من أدوات الشرف المستقبل، من ضمن السيناريوهات المستقبلية. إذا أنا قلت بستخدم أداة السيناريوهات المستقبلية، هناك 26 أداة تحت السيناريوهات المستقبلية، لازم أختار واحدة منها، وأنا أستخدم الGBN اللي هو Global Business Network. في مناهج مثل ما قلنا الشرف المستقبل، هاي منهجية أنا أستخدمها، أنا طورتها بنفسي، سميتها GBN الكعبي، عبارة عن 6 خطوات من خطوات الشرف المستقبل، تبدأ بتحديد الإطار العام للاستشراف وانتهاء بنوافذ المستقبل أو المسمى Leading Indicator. نقطة أخيرة، السيناريو الناجح ليس الذي يحدد المستقبل بدقة، وإنما الذي يمكن المؤسسة من التعلم. يعني أنا مش هدفي النهائي أن أنا أسوي خطة استراتيجية، مش هدف الرئيسي من استشراف المستقبل أعمل خطة استراتيجية. الهدف الرئيسي أن تكون منظمتي متعلمة، يكون موظفين عارفين أو ملمين بالأحداث اللي بتحدث في المستقبل، على أساس أنه يستعد لها الاستعداد المناسب. ما في وقت، وشكرا جزيلا. Thank you. You need it?
All right, we're now at the point where we're going to begin our discussion among the 4 of us. And as soon as that flags, we will open it for questions and answers from the audience. So, my 3 colleagues, do you want to pose a question or make an observation to the other people? Phil? Looks like you're ready.
Well, I would make, is it sound coming through?
Yes.
Testing? Testing, okay. So I would comment on the complementarity between the scenario approach that was just described and the tournament approach. The scenario approach factors into the forecasting tournament we do with the US government in terms of question generation, the questions that populate the tournament, whereas the focus of the tournament itself is on generating accurate probability judgments of components of scenarios. So we do care about accuracy, and we believe that if you ask the right questions in a timely fashion, you can develop early warning and early opportunity indicators that are useful in strategic planning. And I think that is the connection between the first and the last talk.
To take questions from the audience.
I will. Do you want to make any comments?
Other than, I'm very impressed with the pace of rapid growth here, and I think, broadband is also like clean water and education and inalienable human rights, and both Du and Etisalat should open the pipes and flood this place with all the broadband they can give.
Thank you. Suleiman? I have a couple of comments. Phil, an observation. Sometimes forecasts that are wrong are very useful. Sometimes people who always get it wrong are useful also. Because if you could identify somebody who always gets it wrong, you'd go to him and say, "What do you think?" And then you'd know what not to believe.
As a matter of logic, I would agree 100% with that observation that people who are always wrong would be extremely useful inverse indicators for an investment strategy and the like. Unfortunately, nature isn't quite that kind. There are very few people who are that consistently wrong. There are lots of people who are not too much more accurate than the dart-throwing chimpanzee and are essentially at chance accuracy. The challenge is getting above that threshold. But it's actually hard to be consistently worse than the dart-throwing chimpanzee.
Yeah, you've got to get a bad chimpanzee, right? And Suleiman, I'll make an observation about scenarios. Scenarios are in my thinking, in my use in futures research, they're a way of synthesizing a panorama of forecasts into a cohesive story. And it's the linkage between cause and effect in a scenario that gives it power. Instead of saying, here's a list of 100 forecasts, this is what the world's going to be like, a scenario like science fiction puts it into a context that is readable. And in my practice, the best scenarios are those that are absorbing, that draws you into the story and makes clear what the environment that's waiting for you in your decision making. So scenarios, I agree with you, are very useful, but they are not necessarily a forecasting device. They are a way of synthesis, in my practice, a way of putting together a story that is powerful, more powerful than anything it contains. How do you feel about that?
Just in my experience in 2 years or 1 year in scenarios, it's hard to say that. There's too many tools to use under scenario, or too many methods under scenario. It depends on which method you use it. The most important to use it in scenario is the input for the scenario. How accurate the information you collected. If you collect more information related to the project, you will find accurate scenarios.
Yeah, okay. In the Millennium Project, one of the scenarios we constructed perhaps 15 years ago involved a story, cause and effect story, about a terrorist who gets a hold of a weapon of mass destruction. He builds it in his mother's kitchen. And we named that terrorist, that kind of terrorist, a CMAD, S-I-M-A-D, CMAD, single individual, massively destructive. And this guy has some crazy idea, and the crazy idea is he's got to wipe out half of the world's population. So he goes about his business, he's undetected, and so the scenario is absorbing. Who is this guy? What's he after? It drew people into it. And now, 15 years later, we're seeing the real possibility of a CMAD emerging. He's in his mother's kitchen, and he's cooking up a virus, a human virus that can trigger an epidemic, or something like that. So the scenario in that case was a warning. It was not a forecast, although it turns out to be worrisome. It was a warning, and it made that warning persuasive. So it was the essential way it was put together, the way it was written, the way it, therefore, some of the best scenario writers are science fiction writers. So, because that's their practice, that's their job. And a good scenario is one which tracks through cause and effect. This happened and the result is this. This happened and the result is that. And on the quantitative side, there are now some models being built that trace that cause and effect. So they are networks. And beginning with this pebble dropped into the pond, we see the ripples going out and trace why this ripple's bigger than that one, and having done this, then that follows, and so on. So that even though we classify scenarios as qualitative, imaginative, there are parallels on the quantitative side where we can, for example, the work done in New Hampshire on the neo starvation, the limits to growth work, which was a model, a quantitative model, and it showed like Malthus, we were going to run out of food, we were going to run out of materials, raw materials. The curves crossed, demand and supply crossed. And that was proven to be incorrect shortly after it was done 20 years ago, because in fact there were new inventions, and the new inventions eliminated those shortages. But it was useful even though it was wrong, which is the point I was making, because it raised to discussion limits to growth. Please.
We are in deep agreement. So forecasting tournaments without scenarios are intellectually sterile because they don't have that imaginative component. But scenarios that aren't grounded in early warning and opportunity indicators are not sufficiently specific to give useful guidance to policymakers.
Good, thank you. But the policymakers like a good story too, right? Any other comments, back and forth? Okay, questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Please. You need a mic. Take my.
Hello.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. وليد حسين, Exbec Advanced Research Center, Saudi Arabian Oil Company, Saudi Arabia. Thank you very much, distinguished panelists, for extremely outstanding and intellectually rich thoughts, observation, and views. Two brief questions. We heard this morning the definition of the wisdom and the genius of the crowd. Would you kindly highlight what this term stands for? The other question is, we are now at a paradox. We saw that there are technologies coming up our way in this part of the region. We talked about artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things. Now, this part of the world is an urgent need to create jobs for young people. 60% of the MENA region population is less than 20. Demographics are extremely very serious. So what can we do at the societal, cultural level to prepare countries for this, what seems to be unavoidable change coming up our way? Thank you very much again for a very intellectually rich discussion.
Good questions as well. Thank you. Anybody want to tackle them? Phil?
One of the great challenges in the work we do is how to extract wisdom from crowds while tamping down the madness of crowds, because we all know that crowds can be crazy as well as wise. We use a variety of tools, some of them grounded more in human psychology, others grounded more in statistics. The tools grounded in human psychology, one of the most important is a technique that I know Ted has used and others have used, known as Delphi. It's a very good method of extracting wisdom from crowds by avoiding conformity effects. When you run a meeting, usually the person who is at the head of the status hierarchy, the top person, the boss, is the first person to talk. And once that person has spoken, that contaminates the views of everyone else in the room. Relatively few, only a few courageous people, usually no one, is willing to challenge the boss. So you need a method such as Delphi that elicits the views of the individuals in the group anonymously. So nobody knows who is responsible for making a forecast and an explanation. All the information is pooled anonymously. Everybody gets to see what everyone thinks, but they don't know who is thinking it. And that's a process that you can do a couple of times over, and in the process, the result is often a judgment that is more accurate than you would have been able to obtain through the usual method of group discussion.
But wisdom of crowds, if I might tack on to that, refers to a book done by Malcolm Gladwell of that title, where he hypothesized, without a great deal of proof, that if a crowd was put together and had a view about a particular issue, that was more likely to be correct than not. And it's manifested now in markets, prediction markets, where people can bet on future conditions. And there is some research which says that the bets are often in the correct direction and sometimes beat experts. Often, they would say, beat experts. I think that's a method in development now, not proven and not really part of the arsenal, but interesting to track and understand. At the time of the invention of Delphi, as a young man, I was fortunate enough to be there to see it at its birth. The idea was to create a synthetic expert. Let's suppose that the issue being faced at RAND, this was done at RAND in the late 50s and early 60s. Let's suppose that the issue was getting to Mars. How can we get to Mars? When are we going to land at Mars? Now that question involved expertise from a thermodynamicist, from an aerodynamicist, from an expert in ballistic missiles, and so on. We could have brought those people together in a conference room, which was the common way to do it. But as soon as they face each other in the conference room, the person who has the loudest voice, the person who is most commanding in terms of demeanor, carries the day. People who have published their own forecasts about when we can get to Mars will be reluctant to abandon their position in front of their colleagues. This was the problem faced at RAND, working at that time mainly on military problems. So the Delphi was invented to keep these people separate and yet synthesize their answers from all of their perspectives. So the process went something like this. Pose the question through some medium that kept these people apart in terms of identifying who said what, as Phil just mentioned. Get the answers and display the answers in terms of the spread of opinions about when we could get to Mars. Those people who were on the fringes, on the margins, with their dates, were asked to provide reasons. This is in a questionnaire. The reasons came back to the questioners, to these people studying the issue, and then those reasons were fed back to the group. We think it's going to be later than the group because we can't solve the thermodynamic problems, because those problems are really hard and they're going to push it out. When the reasons came back, we asked everybody again in the Delphi process to please tell us if these reasons affected your previous answer. And if they did, modify it. So it was a converging process that took recognition, that recognized the various viewpoints and the reasons. It was a way to sterilize a heated debate, a way to replace a debate with a logical structure for getting at what seemed to be the consensus of opinion. Lots of research has gone on using this technique, lots. And it is observed that more often than not, there is consensus. And there have been several attempts, successful attempts, to analyze the forecast and determine their accuracy through this process. This is 1964 that I'm talking about, when this was developed at RAND, and the first study was on long-range scientific and technical forecasts. A good panel, including science fiction writers. Now, Delphi has come a long way since then. How many Delphis have been run in the world? Tens of 10,000, I'd say. It's as fundamental, not quite, but almost as fundamental as scenarios in terms of usage. And while Suleiman told us about the long list of variations on the theme and other techniques, they are all out there, but they all have their proponents and their detractors. And it's not that complicated. You don't need to go through 36 of them to find a technique that works for your problems. Another question, please.
نعم هناك سؤال هنا عفوا.
I can't see who's speaking. Oh, yes, sir. Go ahead.
بداية تحية طيبة لكم. فعلا كانت جلسة مثمرة ومنتجة جدا وفادتنا وعمت علينا الفائدة والعلم. أتقدم بالشكر الجزيل للشيخ محمد بن راشد ودولة الإمارات العظيمة التي دائما تكون اليد الأولى والسباقة لها للعلم والمعرفة وتنمية العلم وتنمية المعرفة. أنا الدكتور سيف الدين أبو نحل، أستاذ القانون جامعة العلوم الحديثة. لي فقط بالمداخلة هذه سؤالين من خلال الاستشراف وما دونته بملاحظات في عقلي في هذا الموضوع. استنتجت أن الاستشراف هو توقعات وتخمينات وفرضيات معينة، وبصراحة الاستراتيجية التي أعددتموها لعرض هذا الموضوع جيدة، لكن سؤالي متى نطبق ما توقعناه؟ متى نطبق الوقت الذي يكون وقت صحيح لتطبيق ما استشرفنا به وما توقعناه وما وضعنا له من تخمينات وفرضيات؟ هذا السؤال الأول. السؤال الثاني بموضوع التعليم. نحن في عملية تسارع وتطور ونمو، تسارع شديد، عجلة تدور بسرعة معنا. كيف نربط جيل الشباب والطلبة بهذا التسارع الذي يمتد بسرعة ويتقدم كسرعة الصاروخ هذا؟ كيف نربطه مع الشباب، وكيف نجعل حلقة وصل بين التقدم والنمو وبين الشباب وعقولهم واستيعابهم لهذا التطور الرهيب؟ وشكرا.
Good. Thank you very much. I note that we have had this question about youth twice, and we neglected to answer the earlier question, so I'll try to pose both together. What does, to the panel, what does accelerated change, how does that link into the youth, into jobs, into expectations, into excitement about what is possible, into improving the human race? Does it give new goals to young people? How can they be part of this visioning of the future? Anybody? Mike.
To engage the young people, you have to empower them. You have to recognize that this device, what a young person can do with this, it's unimaginable. If you do not involve the young people, give them access to bandwidth, and good quality education, and make them feel and know that they have a vested interest in their future, then you would have lost them. If you do not have the youth on your side, then they become the fertile breeding ground for all kinds of bad ideas. It could be ISIS, it could be ISIL, it could be Islamic fundamentalism, and then that becomes a threat to the wider society. The youths of today are the future leaders of tomorrow, and the Arab world has a big problem. If you do not empower the youths by giving them education, giving them opportunities, letting them see that there is light at the end of the tunnel and they're part of the solution and not part of the problem, then you're going to have a humongous problem. Any kind of national development that takes place without the effective participation of young people would be setting the stage for disaster. Having said this, the young people of the Arab world are very good at social media. I recommend you create clusters of creativity in Saudi Arabia, in Jordan, all across the Arab world. Create centers of excellence where young people you can harness their intellectual capital, and you can have a mentor-mentoree program.
Yes.
If you give a young person the opportunity that they're valued and their contributions mean a lot, then we will have a win-win situation.
I would add, make them part of this. Ask them about their expectations for the future. Ask them about judgments, their judgments on change and where it leads. Phil, you had a point?
When you look at who the most talented people are in forecasting tournaments, the young are overrepresented. The young see these tournaments as an opportunity to show their mettle. And so it has an interesting, energizing effect on younger people, and I think it energizes them in a constructive way. It energizes them to become more thoughtful, self-critical, and creative.
Thank you. Suleiman.
بالنسبة للسؤال الأول, the first question, for the first question, بالنسبة للسؤال الأول, أنت سألت عن إحنا عملنا فرضيات وعملنا سيناريوهات مستقبلية, متى نطبقها؟ نطبقها دايركت على طول. يعني أنت الحين سويت سيناريوهات مستقبلية, تعلمت منها, عرفت شو اللي ممكن يحدث في المستقبل, لكن لازم تبني عليها خطط استراتيجية عشان نطبقها على طول. المهم أن لازم يكون عندك قائد داعم, لازم يكون عندك متخذ قرار قوي أن يخاطر للمستقبل, أن إذا أنا افترضت شيء يحدث في المستقبل, إذا كان القائد ضعيف أو ما عنده حكمة بيخاف يطبق هالاستراتيجيات الجديدة. فأنت مهم أن تكون عندك قائد داعم يؤمن بفكرة استشراف المستقبل, وبالتالي هو بيقدر هالمخاطر وبيتخذها. فعلى طول في فرصة, في فرضية, في سيناريو, ابدأ تطبيقها يعني.
And we found in our work that making the decision maker part of the forecasting process is often a device that can be used because they feel that what comes out of that activity, at least partially, has been determined by themselves. So they become part of it. They become enlisted. They have ownership of the forecasts and therefore the policies which follow. We can take one more question, please, and then I'll wind it up.
Assalamu alaikum. I am here. Left side. Yes.
Who has the microphone?
I have the mic in the second line. Yes. My name is Fatma Swedi. I am head of knowledge management in one of the government organizations. My question related to the future insight or future forecast. Worldwide, the concept of excellent strategic planning, you should have your long-term strategic planning, even it is exceed some of the company or the countries, they exceed the 10 years, not only 5 years. Some of them have 50 years strategic planning. Usually they forecast what's going to be on. They put different scenarios in the organizations. They check their capability inside or outside. And at the same time, they scan the organization's opportunity risk. So correct me if I am wrong. What is the difference between future insight and the strategic? From my perception, I can see it is only they add flavor to the strategic planning and they call it future, and it's become trendy words. So what is the significant change between excellent strategic planning and the future forecast?
Okay, strategic planning, if I might pick that up. Strategic planning is what a general does. He moves his troops, he makes tactical decisions, but the plans for the war are his strategic plans. It's a strategy, it is an approach, it's a way that he's going to go about accomplishing an end, and everything else follows that or supports that. You might have asked the question, I thought you were going there, what time horizon should you use in planning? And the answer to that I've often been asked that, the answer to that question, which I give, is you should have as your planning horizon that time dimension in which you expect your strategy to take action, to take effect. There's no sense in forecasting 10,000 years from now unless there's a particular reason to do so. I'm going to close with this. There was a 10,000 year forecast made. I was part of the team that did it with some science fiction writers and some sociologists. In the United States, there's a place where nuclear material is buried, and it's in a deep salt mine and put away from civilization in New Mexico. The Environmental Protection Agency in our country was required to produce an environmental impact statement which had some relevance to the time horizon of that material. Turns out that the half-life of that material was 10,000 years. So our teams, there were 4 of them, functioning separately, had to produce a 10,000-year forecast. We all met, we did
One last question.
And we knew that it was a vacuous forecast. The chances of it being accurate, Phil, in your terms, were 0, absolutely 0. But it was nevertheless illuminating. And the scenarios that came out of that activity were used by a design team to design indicators of danger that would survive changes in language, changes in civilization, impacts of meteorites, and anything else that could be thrown at it. So even though it was an impossible task assigned to the futurists, it produced some useful output in that sense. Gentlemen, thank you. Good contributions and very, very useful discussion. Thank you.